I've seen drones change the entire course of a battle, so when Hollywood shows a single operator wiping out an entire base, we need to ask, would that even be possible in 2025? In this breakdown, we're testing those scenes against today's battlefield realities: drone swarms, electronic warfare, and jamming, cyber operations, AI-assisted support systems, and modern special operations doctrine. We're putting over 70 new movie and TV battle scenes under that lens, from aerial strikes to cyber sabotage and counter-terror raids. We'll show which of them could survive under real 2025 tactics, and which would collapse once electronic warfare, cyber threats, and logistics are factored in. And it makes sense to start with the one tool that has reshaped every battlefield recently: the drone. Modern drone warfare on screen. When movies show a drone wiping out a platoon or leveling an enemy base, the question is whether anything close to that could actually happen in 2025. On screen, it's often one operator in a darkened room, joystick in hand, casually deciding the outcome of an entire battle. That image is cinematic, but it doesn't reflect how drones are truly used. Today's drone fights are swarm-based, networked, heavily contested by electronic warfare, and run by integrated teams, not hero pilots acting alone with a single drone feed. The biggest shift is the rise of swarming tactics. Rather than one oversized, all-powerful drone, forces now rely on large numbers of smaller aircraft moving together with coordinated effects. Swarms overwhelm defenses, split responsibilities between targeting and surveillance, and provide redundancy if some are lost. Research shows that on the ground, frontline units are now fielding large numbers of FPV quadcopters in combat, especially in Ukraine, where electronic jamming and signal denial have become routine defenses. A lone super drone that survives everything sent at it, as often depicted in blockbusters, is essentially fiction in the context of 2025 battlefields. Electronic warfare is what often decides whether drones succeed or fail. In a real fight, opponents track control signals, jam their frequencies, or spoof navigation data to redirect or crash them outright. Films gloss over this, usually showing helpless soldiers scattered while a drone hunts unopposed overhead. In reality, the moment hostile drones appear, defenders roll out radar interference systems, mobile air defense units, or launch their own drones to counter. This constant cycle of drones versus EW responses defines modern drone operations in a way Hollywood rarely acknowledges. Urban warfare makes the contrast even clearer. Movies lean heavily into dramatic strikes, glass towers exploding from above, while in practice tiny quadcopters are sent through alleys and windows. Pocket-sized models now map building interiors or identify hostages without putting soldiers in direct danger. These micro-drones have already changed how raids and counterterrorism operations are carried out, far more subtle and precise than the kind of airstrike montages we see in fiction. Behind every drone strike lies an entire infrastructure supporting it. Real-life operations require intelligence teams analyzing feeds, cyber units protecting control links, technicians keeping equipment running, and commanders authorizing targets. One concise way to put it: no drone mission functions in isolation. Success depends on logistics, ISR, electronic protection, and coordinated decision-making. Without that depth, drones are quickly neutralized in contested skies. Dramatizations usually capture only one truth: drones force enemies to change tactics and stay hidden. But they fail to show how vulnerable unmanned systems remain against electronic countermeasures. That gap between Hollywood's invincible drones and the fragile, heavily supported systems we see in 2025 is a reminder of how often films prioritize spectacle over accuracy. And it raises a bigger question. If filmmakers misrepresent drone warfare this much, what happens when the story shifts from a physical fight to the digital fight? Cyber warfare integration. In movies, hackers instantly pull the plug on entire cities, flipping battle outcomes with a few keystrokes. It looks cinematic, perfect timing, troops moving as digital chaos clears the way. But actual offensive cyber operations in 2025 don't work like battlefield magic. Instead of instant hacks, they demand weeks or months of patient reconnaissance, persistent access, and carefully prepared exploits that lie dormant until commanded. These aren't tools a soldier can call into a firefight on demand. They're prepositioned effects, triggered only once enough groundwork has been laid. Real doctrine treats cyber infiltration as a long game. Specialists spend painstaking hours mapping networks, identifying redundancies, and slipping tailored code into critical systems without detection. The disruption might be planned to coincide with a larger campaign, but it isn't improvised in the middle of a skirmish. For example, a campaign that integrated cyber and information operations required extended preparation and persistent access before its effects could line up with conventional strikes. That illustrates how cyber success depends on preparation more than reaction. The movie version of a blackout improvised in sync with bullets flying simply doesn't line up with reality. In military planning, cyber is rarely a direct frontline weapon. Operators focus on undermining logistics, communications, supply chains, or morale, objectives that shape the battlefield over time without requiring visibility into the firefight itself. By the time an infantry unit is under fire, those digital effects are either already arranged to support them or they're not coming at all. That's why so much of what we see on screen, cyber warriors typing frantically while watching helmet camera feeds, is more a dramatic device than an accurate reflection of cyber's role. Another element that films skip over is the approval pipeline. Offensive cyber strikes bring far-reaching risks. They can cross national borders, disrupt civilian systems, and trigger political fallout. Because of that, each major action goes through legal review, interagency debates, and often national-level authorization. The idea that one specialist could push a button and shut down a foreign city during a firefight ignores how tightly controlled and politically sensitive these decisions are. Operators aren't just trying to solve technical puzzles, they're working under strict legal guardrails and command oversight that make impulsive actions impossible. And even when an attack is triggered, defenses make it unlikely to look like the sweeping Hollywood blackout. Industrial controllers and SCADA systems are layered with redundancies, offline backups, and manual overrides. Military networks add encryption, segmentation, and situational monitoring. That makes it hard to cripple an entire grid at once. More often, cyber produces partial effects, slowing logistics, muddying communications, or feeding misinformation that disrupts decision-making. On screen, cyber is dazzling and instantaneous. In practice, it's incremental and opaque, shaping the war space in ways that aren't always visible. That disconnect highlights how films simplify entire domains of warfare for spectacle. And just as movies reframe digital battles into something faster than they are, they also reshape how we see the people carrying weapons on the ground, especially when it comes to who is shown leading elite teams. Female combat roles and special operations accuracy. Films now frequently depict women at the center of special operations units, sometimes leading elite missions or carrying the entire storyline through a solo fight. These portrayals lean on visual spectacle, one fighter outmatching entire squads, but they misrepresent how real special operations teams function. Success in these units has always come through collective execution, structured pipelines, and uncompromising standards rather than through individuals portrayed as somehow outside of those limits. The reality in 2025 is that women are part of these pipelines in measurable, documented ways. Graduates from programs like Army Ranger School now include women, and female officers have gone through selection processes for special operations communities where every candidate, regardless of gender, faces the same demanding requirements. These programs involve rucking heavy loads over long distances, timed runs, water confidence events, and leadership evaluations under intense stress. Attrition remains high across the board. Most who attempt do not finish, but those who graduate meet the exact same bar. There's no separate track and no lowered expectation. That fact corrects the persistent myth that integration somehow comes through exceptions or shortcuts. There have also been deployments where women contributed in roles Hollywood rarely touches. During operations in Afghanistan, cultural support teams attached to Ranger and Green Beret elements entered villages or households where male soldiers could not, gathering intelligence, providing access to local populations, and at times moving alongside teams on raids. These missions were not side stories. They directly affected operational reach and demonstrated the tactical utility of integration in environments where cultural barriers limited options for male operators. That background stands in contrast to the purely physical contests often emphasized in films. Numbers clarify the picture further. Women remain a minority in the special operations community, but their presence is no longer hypothetical or symbolic. They are part of the training pipelines, they exist within operational teams, and their involvement continues to expand slowly and deliberately. Films sometimes oversell this by showing entire special operations squads composed exclusively of women or a single protagonist tasked with missions that would normally require a whole support network. The truth sits between extremes. Progress is real and structural, built on standards that have remained constant, but large-scale representation is still in development. Where film depictions are beginning to improve is in acknowledging leadership. Some recent stories show women making tactical decisions, managing complex operations, or directing forces in the field, roles closer to what can be found today. That framing avoids framing success purely through exaggerated feats of strength, instead showing command presence and decision-making. Accuracy, then, is mixed. Cinematic shortcuts still distort how often women appear in special operations roles and exaggerate their portrayal as singularly dominant fighters. Yet in 2025, acknowledging their actual integration into these pipelines gets closer to the truth than ever before. And when we shift from personnel to technology, the same pattern holds. Films oversell independence and control, while the reality shows tighter oversight and limits. AI-assisted military technology. Hollywood often turns artificial intelligence into the decisive actor on the battlefield, showing machines calculating every move and firing without hesitation. By 2025, however, the role of AI inside militaries looks very different from those portrayals. Armies do not hand over full lethal authority to machines. Instead, they use AI as a decision support tool, an extra layer of speed and efficiency for logistics, planning, target recognition, and sensor fusion. Humans remain in the loop for any lethal effect because policy, ethics, and doctrines still demand a human decision-maker before weapons are released. Science fiction loves the image of unmanned fighters or robotic vehicles independently hunting targets, leaving human operators sidelined. The truth is that current AI systems inform, but they don't decide. Algorithms can sift through drone feeds, highlight unusual movement on the battlefield, or anticipate maintenance failures before they happen. The benefit comes in reducing the burden on commanders and analysts, not in bypassing them. For lethal strike authorization, militaries still require human confirmation at every step. There is no button that lets an algorithm autonomously carry out a kill chain. That position is backed by deliberate safeguards. Both the US and the European Union have adopted policies that bar fully unsupervised lethal decision-making. The reasoning is straightforward. Autonomy introduces risks of accidents, flawed classifications, or unintended collateral damage. These rules are not just paper regulations, they're coded into the design of many modern systems, with hard constraints to keep human oversight in place. The trust placed in AI is therefore carefully measured, never absolute. Research continues nonetheless, which explains why Hollywood latches onto the theme. Agencies such as DARPA and the Department of Defense actively explore advanced AI, but most of that work focuses on resilience, secure design, and adversarial testing. Teams run red team-style exercises to probe how algorithms react to deception, spoofed signals, or manipulated data. The fact that a simple pattern shift can cause an AI classifier to mistake a civilian bus for a valid military target illustrates why militaries remain cautious. Adversaries will exploit every weakness they can find, which makes blind trust in AI unrealistic. Where AI does make the largest difference today is in non-lethal domains. Predictive logistics software shapes supply chains more efficiently. Sensor fusion allows commanders to view multiple feeds in a single, clearer picture. Predictive maintenance systems keep aircraft and vehicles mission-ready longer, reducing downtime. These roles don't generate the drama of a robot picking its own targets, but they explain why AI is increasingly central to planning and sustaining modern operations. The hesitation rests in the stakes. Bias coded into an algorithm, the challenge of operating in complex urban settings, or the legal consequences of a misidentification mean that commanders avoid giving machines final authority. For that reason, films overshoot the reality. AI has tremendous power, but in practice it is restrained, supervised, and applied selectively. And just as Hollywood amplifies AI into something faster and more decisive than it really is, it does the same when it turns its lens on how modern forces confront threats in dense cities. Urban counterterrorism tactics. In dense cities, counterterrorism operations carry higher stakes than almost any other mission type, and Hollywood's fast-paced firefights rarely reflect the way professionals actually approach them. Films love to open with squads hammering through doors and overwhelming targets with heavy gunfire, but force-on-force breaching raids are now the option of last resort. In reality, modern doctrine emphasizes reconnaissance, intelligence-led planning, and surgical entries designed to limit chaos. Small drones, negotiation strategies, and layered surveillance are at the forefront of how units secure these environments, not rushing blindly into stairwells. By 2025, international guidance from groups like NATO and the UN Office of Counterterrorism reinforces this approach. Protecting civilian populations and vulnerable infrastructure requires precision and restraint. That means commanders often spend hours building a full picture of the threat before sending anyone into a building. Negotiators work in parallel, exploiting time and dialogue as leverage in hostage or barricade scenarios. The emphasis is on control rather than spectacle. The fewer shots fired, the more successful the operation is judged to be. Technology makes this patience effective. Backpack-sized quadcopters now slip over rooftops to provide live video of enemy positions, while throwable microdrones and small track robots move through dark rooms and narrow hallways long before an operator does. These tools already see use today, mapping interiors and identifying potential hostages with far more precision than any theatrical explosion. The difference is stark. On screen, a hostage rescue often begins with blasts that scatter walls and civilians alike, but in reality, operators use low-signature tools to quietly establish dominance before entry. Rules of engagement add a layer Hollywood frequently overlooks. Every round fired in an urban environment risks unintended injury because walls, doors, and glass do not stop gunfire. Operators are trained around what's sometimes called the avoid the window principle, simple but critical, because bullets pass easily through common building materials and blast effects behave unpredictably. This single guideline ensures teams think about angles, firing lines, and backstops before engaging, something most movies replace with endless muzzle flashes for cinematic energy. Intelligence remains central to decision-making. Real teams build operations around surveillance feeds, movement signatures, and often cooperation with local communities. Where films show residents as panicked or obstructive, counterterrorism in practice depends on trust networks among civilians. Shared information about who moves in or out of a building or subtle changes in routine can allow units to intervene early and with far less violence. It's a form of counterterrorism invisibility, victories that look small on their own, but prevent much larger confrontations later. The defining characteristic of modern CT work is restraint powered by precision tools. Units trained to end threats before they spread, while minimizing the risks to bystanders nearby. The majority of missions are measured not by how dramatic they appear, but by how quietly and efficiently they conclude. That difference between spectacle and actual practice also shows up when Hollywood shifts from depicting action in the field to imagining how soldiers are shaped at the very start of their careers. Boot Camp 2025 versus Hollywood. Films often linger on recruit training, but the boot camp experience in 2025 doesn't look much like Hollywood's version. Movies still default to non-stop screaming, barracks humiliation, and mud-crawling scenes that suggest breaking people down through intimidation is the essence of training. That image is closer to a Vietnam-era trope than to modern practice. Today's training pipeline still demands discipline and stress tolerance, but the methods are structured around teamwork, repetition, and resilience rather than universal harassment. The focus has shifted from pure punishment to deliberate stress inoculation. Drill instructors still push recruits hard, but the pressure is designed to build decision-making under duress instead of just breaking somebody's confidence. Structured wellness programs, sleep discipline, and injury prevention are now built into the process to reduce unnecessary attrition. Instructors are evaluated not only on how tough they make conditions, but also on how effectively they strengthen recruits to succeed in advanced training. Mental health support is integrated earlier than ever before, reflecting the reality that cognitive readiness is just as vital as physical load-bearing. Many cinematic training details are outdated. Rope work, knot tying, and endless manual fieldcraft drills still appear in film montages, but basic training no longer devotes time to those skills. Instead, they're reserved for specialized schools like ranger training or the mountain phase, where advanced climbing and survival skills are required. The modern recruit pipeline emphasizes rifle marksmanship, repetitive team exercises, tactical movement patterns, and fitness tests calibrated for operational endurance. It's a mission-focused baseline, not a collection of survival stunts. One of the biggest differences is technology. Simulation domes, VR headsets, and digital weapon trainers let recruits practice squad maneuvers and decision-making without wasting ammunition or exposing teammates to risk. VR ranges allow instructors to manipulate stress variables and present recruits with branching challenges that mirror what they might face in combat zones. These systems complement live-fire ranges, adding scalable realism that builds confidence and tactical memory before recruits interact with unpredictable environments. Hollywood still leans on obstacle courses and obstacle hall slapstick, but modern training pairs physical rigor with data-driven repetition. Another detail missing from most portrayals is how recruits are tracked through the system. Entrance processing and medical screenings at MEPS set the baseline, ensuring that recruits arrive ready for their assigned training path. From there, basic training produces disciplined generalists, while officer candidates and advanced individual trainees branch into more specialized curricula. Infantry soldiers, cyber specialists, and medics all pass through the same discipline and stress inoculation, but their advanced skills diverge quickly. That context explains why the one-size-fits-all boot camp montages in films feel more like relics than reflections. Accuracy in portrayals is also undermined by how progress is measured. Modern ranges score weapons handling through electronics. Fitness progression is tracked digitally. Feedback is immediate. Instructors can pinpoint who is falling behind, who is excelling, and what needs reinforcement. Scrubbing floors or hauling packs until collapse, as often seen on screen, has been replaced with real-time assessments tied to operational readiness. At its core, the shift is clear. Boot Camp in 2025 aims to produce adaptable soldiers who can think, coordinate, and endure, not just survive yelling contests or arbitrary punishments. Training is targeted and systemic rather than theatrical. And just as films misrepresent how armies forge their recruits, they also miss key details about the gear and systems relied on once those soldiers are deployed into the field. Helicopter rescue with new gear. Helicopter extraction scenes are another staple in action films, but the reality in 2025 looks very different from what audiences are shown. On screen, pilots swoop low, dangle crew members on ropes, and pluck survivors from chaos almost like comic book heroes. Sometimes the pilot himself is shown leaving the controls mid-flight, reaching for victims with one hand, and then somehow climbing back inside, as if the helicopter can hover effortlessly on its own. Those visuals are dramatic, but they don't reflect modern practice. Real rescues depend on strict crew roles, specialized systems, and calculated planning, never on a pilot abandoning the cockpit. The difference begins with modern awareness tools. Helicopter crews do not rely purely on vision through smoke, rain, or darkness. Aircraft are fitted with infrared sensors, helmet-mounted displays, and stabilized camera systems that can pick out a person's heat signature through cloud or dust. Crews can hover precisely over a survivor without leaning dangerously outside. Rescue drones often work ahead of the aircraft, scouting confined terrain or providing precise coordinates before the winch is even deployed. The hoist itself is another overlooked detail. Movies often show it as little more than a rope, swinging violently beneath the aircraft. In reality, rescue hoists are engineered for controlled stability and have defined load limits, typically several hundred kilograms, depending on platform, not the exaggerated lift of vehicle loads films might imply. Stabilization functions counteract rotor wash and crosswinds to keep the line manageable, reducing the need for dangerous acrobatics below the aircraft. Crews rely on winches, baskets, and harness setups to bring survivors up in controlled motions rather than the frantic dangling sequences audiences are used to. Specialized training supports these procedures. Rescue swimmers, for example, conduct annual dunker training to stay proficient for underwater escapes, practice hoist jettison protocols for emergencies, and often deploy using night vision goggles when rescues occur under poor light. These steps ensure safety not just for the survivor, but for the crew as well. The risks are real. Rotor wash, power limitations, and aircraft weight restrictions all influence whether a rescue attempt can even be made. Every move is assessed against these constraints, making risk calculations central to the mission. Modern aircraft reflect that professionalism. Platforms like the HH-60W Jolly Green II are equipped with extended range tanks, integrated defensive systems, and advanced avionics to keep crews safe when operating in hostile areas. Every mission is calculated. Payload capacity, endurance, and margin for survivability all factor into planning, none of which are visible in Hollywood's endless fuel scenarios. Even rescues at sea come with more procedure than spectacle. Survivors rely on flotation devices, thermal bottles, and cold water protection to stay alive until a crew arrives. That equipment is often the deciding factor in survival, not the last-second rope drop that dominates movie clips. Perhaps the greatest difference is redundancy. Crews operate with backup hoists, alternate extraction methods, and layered systems designed to prevent a single point of failure. Films omit this discipline, choosing stunt-like risks instead. That gap between real-world precision and screen drama becomes just as clear when we move from flying crews to the way small unit tactics are shown inside buildings. Special Forces tactics in Netflix series. Netflix frequently puts special operations units at the center of its big action sequences, but the tactics it shows rarely match the reality of how raids are actually conducted. Episodes often zero in on a single operator clearing rooms at speed, explosions lighting the background, and bodies dropped in seconds. It's all cut for momentum, but the truth is that a real raid is built on precise stack formations, sector responsibility, and drill rehearsals practiced until automatic. Instead of lone heroes flying through doorways, every operator knows their lane and maintains overlapping coverage, moving methodically rather than recklessly sprinting into the unknown. On screen, the breach is often shown as a loud, speeding rush of adrenaline. In practice, the pace is controlled because patience prevents missed threats or friendly fire. A team stack advances like a machine with each member covering not just the immediate front, but angles that protect the group. The first operator secures the doorway, the next covers a flank, and every roll behind reinforces the previous one. That choreography keeps the group alive, and is the opposite of the stylized solo clearances seen in many Netflix depictions. The rehearsals behind an entry are what make it work. Special operations training involves countless dry runs in full-scale mock-ups of apartment blocks, with variations drilled until every member reacts without hesitation. Flashy window dives or dramatic flips don't play a role here. Controlled door breaches and deliberate steps through rooms matter more, because each pause allows for rapid threat evaluation, checking for civilians and clearing dead space where combatants might conceal themselves. The real effect looks calm and measured, but to unit members, that's what survival depends on. Another defining contrast is the level of support layered overhead. Real raids are rarely blind entries. Small ISR drones circle discreetly above, providing thermal imagery and video feeds streamed directly to team leaders on the ground. This helps coordinate timing and ensures units know what to expect before they breach. The cinematic omission of this layer makes strikes look reckless when in reality, surveillance and overwatch are force multipliers just as decisive as the stack itself. Casualty care is also misrepresented. In fast-moving Netflix portrayals, downed operators are often skipped past to preserve pacing. In reality, raids are built with casualty evacuation steps preloaded. Kits are staged, evacuation points plotted, and team members designated as combat medics. Planning for injuries starts before the mission, preventing a small wound from evolving into a fatal one. Realism here means redundancy, not improvisation. Netflix drama relies on non-stop gunfire during hostage scenarios, with operators breaking doors under fire. Yet effective counter-terror raids integrate negotiators, intelligence feeds, external containment, and patience. The silence and pauses rarely make for gripping television, but they are closer to how these critical missions succeed. These gaps between myth and practice illustrate how series frame combat for entertainment rather than accuracy. And while small unit realism often gets lost on screen, the same distortion applies when cameras turn to the sea, where cinematic naval battles lean on spectacle even more aggressively. Naval warfare with 2025 tech films often frame naval battles like duels from the age of battleships, with vessels firing at each other in plain sight. In 2025, though, fleets do not close distance for visible exchanges. Modern naval combat revolves around standoff weapons, long-range missiles, hypersonics, electronic warfare, and the fusion of multiple sensor feeds. Ships typically engage targets they cannot see with the naked eye, relying on surveillance assets and data networks to detect, classify, and strike long before the enemy appears on the horizon. Once hypersonic weapons entered service, the dynamics of sea combat shifted entirely. These missiles travel at extreme speeds and cover vast distances, giving fleets the ability to destroy opponents from hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away. Instead of dramatic cannon fire at close range, the emphasis is on early detection. Drones and unmanned platforms provide reconnaissance, relaying targeting information back to commanders so that strikes can be launched while ships stay concealed. Recent conflicts have even shown navies deploying unmanned surface vessels as remote strike tools, proving how operators now use expendable craft for tasks once conducted only by manned ships. This reality makes prolonged surface shootouts between large warships increasingly rare. What often defines encounters today are competing layers of electronic warfare, jamming radars, spoofing satellites, degrading GPS accuracy, and hiding signatures to make targeting more difficult. Torpedoes launched by submarines remain another hidden threat. A single submerged attack can terminate an enemy ship without a surface duel taking place at all. These factors mean that survivability comes from reducing detectability and denying an opponent clean targeting data, not from bracing for salvo fire. Technology also plays a part in reshaping defense. While not yet widely fielded, railguns and directed energy weapons are under active testing, designed to shoot down high-speed threats or intercept swarms of drones. Unlike the cinematic dramatization of glowing beams tearing ships apart, the real deployments focus on highly controlled point defense. Hollywood tends to ignore these developments, but they show how speed and precision are shaping what navies can and cannot do in a contested environment. Submarines offer another reminder that screen portrayals exaggerate. Films often depict them as silent hunters, moving invisibly below the surface. Real submarines make significant noise, from propeller cavitation to machinery vibrations, and opposing forces use sonar arrays to exploit those vulnerabilities. Subcrews spend entire missions adjusting course, speed, and mechanical settings just to manage their acoustic profile. Silence is relative, never absolute. Logistics is another layer absent from fiction. Ammunition, fuel, and provisions do not appear endlessly. Nations rely on replenishment ships and carefully timed supply chains to sustain fleets during long deployments. Without that system, even the most advanced warship becomes little more than a floating target once resources run dry. The most decisive factor, however, remains timing. Hypersonic weapons cut engagement windows to seconds. Dodging them through elaborate maneuvers, as often suggested in films, is close to impossible. Victory depends not on flashy evasion, but on having the awareness and electronic defenses to neutralize threats before they launch. And just as distance and detection dominate naval warfare now, the same logic applies to how militaries manage communications on land, where what movies call effortless battlefield chatter looks very different in practice. Military communications realism. In war films, radio calls often sound like clean dialogue lifted straight from a phone conversation. Every word cuts through perfectly, even with gunfire in the background, and entire strategies are spoken aloud as if noise, static, or competing signals never enter the picture. That clarity makes the story easy to follow, but field communications are far more constrained and far less forgiving. Modern tactical radios are encrypted digital systems that cycle through frequency-hopping waveforms designed to prevent interception. The reality is that transmissions often come broken, clipped, or buried in static. Because of this, soldiers rely heavily on brevity codes, short, prearranged phrases that carry precise meaning with minimal airtime. A single word like contact can compress what would otherwise be a long explanation, and everyone on the net knows exactly how to respond. The principle is simple. The longer the transmission, the greater the risk of confusion or interception. By 2025, these tactical nets link far beyond handheld radios. Units connect back through satellites, relays, and nodes that move both voice and data across continents when links are intact. This makes communication more capable, but also more dependent. If satellites are jammed or relays disrupted, teams fall back to local nets, brevity codes, and even visual signals. Training covers these contingencies, so a unit can keep moving even when digital systems are cut off. The risks of overcommunication are real. Every broadcast can reveal a unit's location to an opponent equipped with signal tracking tools. That's why operators are drilled to keep transmissions as short as possible. Hollywood's running dialogues over open channels would create immediate vulnerabilities in real combat. Extended chatter on air doesn't just slow down responses, it exposes a team to detection and targeting. Electronic warfare is another factor films rarely acknowledge. For all the cinematic confidence in radios, in real battlefields, entire channels can disappear under heavy jamming. Operators then shift frequencies or implement backup signals already rehearsed before missions. In some environments, hand signals and visual confirmation become the only way forward. Entire engagements can hinge not on who fires first, but on who sustains communication long enough to coordinate effectively. Language itself is standardized for speed and precision. Instead of improvised phrases like "cover me" or "I'm going over here," orders are boiled down to terms drilled until automatic. This prevents hesitation and avoids misinterpretation when seconds matter. Soldiers are trained to compress thoughts into code rather than turn airwaves into conversations. As one memorable rule explains in training, say less, mean more. Cinematic. Portrayals of flawless comms erase the constant static, discipline, and dependence on redundancy that shape real battlefield communication. Those limits shape how units move and how commanders control forces. And just as films simplify the noise and vulnerability of radios, they also simplify what happens when a bullet strikes protective gear. Body armor and equipment. When discussing protective gear, films tend to exaggerate its capabilities to the point of fantasy. Characters walk through storm after storm of gunfire, shaking off sprays of bullets as though their vests render them untouchable. The reality is more nuanced. Today's body armor and modular equipment dramatically improve survivability, but they stop well short of making any soldier invulnerable. Modern systems combine lightweight ceramic plates with soft armor layers to counter a wide range of threats. These plates can stop rifle rounds, but only within strict limits. A single strike may be absorbed, perhaps a second one too, but repeated hits or shots to the same area compromise the plate's integrity. Even when a round doesn't penetrate, the immense energy transfer can lead to cracked ribs, heavy bruising, or internal trauma. Instead of the flawless protection seen on screen, armor operates more like a life-saving cushion, reducing the odds of a fatal wound without eliminating danger. Equipment designs have also shifted toward modularity, allowing troops to tailor their kits to different missions. Attachments for ammunition, medical gear, and communication systems can be mounted or stripped depending on context. What films leave out is how exhausting that weight becomes over time. Hours of movement with a vest carrying multiple plates, water, radios, and weapon systems grind down endurance. Even the best designed gear still taxes the body, and commanders constantly weigh survival against fatigue when setting loadouts. To address that tension, military labs and defense contractors are actively experimenting with powered and mechanical exoskeleton prototypes. These trial systems aim to offload some of the heavy burden from the soldier, providing lift assistance or redistributing weight across external frames. They remain in experimental phases and are not yet standard issue, but tests show potential for reducing fatigue during long operations. This research direction contrasts sharply with the near-superhuman mobility Hollywood grants to soldiers weighed down with gear who run, leap, and fight as if unencumbered. Coverage is another critical limit. Plates only protect the torso where they sit. Joints, limbs, and the lower body remain exposed. Helmets provide additional defense, but higher caliber threats or explosive fragments still defeat them. Every uncovered area represents vulnerability, and even covered areas can still sustain painful injuries from blunt impact. The body is not immune beneath a vest, it is only shielded within parameters. Testing standards drive this entire ecosystem. Armor is certified against specific rounds and environmental conditions, undergoing strict impact trials and durability tests under temperature extremes. Plates degrade under fire, and real gear has expiration dates. By contrast, on-screen armor never cracks, never fails, and never adds weight, always portrayed as a faultless shield. The difference is critical. Real equipment buys time and survival chances, but it doesn't erase risk. Soldiers remain exposed in ways audiences rarely see, a reminder that combat outcomes depend on more than what gear can absorb. This focus on survivability through equipment highlights the gap between cinematic invincibility and battlefield reality. And while armor and plates determine how much punishment a soldier can endure, other tools determine how accurately they can strike back, especially when engagements demand precision under pressure. Sniper tactics with modern optics. Movies often frame the sniper as an almost mythical figure, firing through storms or smoke and landing impossible kills with a single squeeze of the trigger. In these scenes, the rifle's optics appear to bend reality. Bullets cut through crosswinds or pouring rain, landing perfectly on target without hesitation. That makes for striking visuals, but it oversimplifies what precision shooting really demands. In practice, long-range shots remain some of the most technically complex tasks in combat, requiring more than just one person and a high-powered scope. Modern optics are remarkably advanced compared to earlier generations. Thermal sights let snipers see concealed targets through darkness, fog, or cover. Integrated laser rangefinders calculate distances to the meter. Digital ballistic calculators process variables like air temperature, pressure, and even barrel wear, while feeding corrections directly into the optic. Combined, these tools reduce guesswork and allow trained shooters to extend their effective range. Yet none of these eliminate the realities of ballistics or the unpredictability of the environment. A bullet still begins to drop as soon as it leaves the barrel, and wind, mirage, or humidity can all shift its path slightly off course. This is why real sniper engagements almost always involve a two-person team, not one lone shooter. The spotter confirms range, checks wind calls, tracks trace, and assists in ballistic corrections while the sniper prepares the shot. Together, they fine-tune calculations that movies reduce to a single breath and a trigger pull. Without this support, even state-of-the-art optics cannot guarantee accuracy beyond mid-range distances. Consumer-grade rifles, despite what films sometimes suggest, do not allow anyone to step up and replicate world record shots on their own. Just as misleading is how quickly these sequences unfold. On screen, the crosshair settles, the shot is fired, and the target drops instantly. In real operations, pulling the trigger is often the smallest part of the job. Snipers may spend hours, or even days, in concealed positions simply observing, gathering intelligence, and transmitting data. In fact, studies and doctrines show observation and reporting make up 80 to 90% of a sniper's mission profile, with shots fired being rare and deliberate. Hollywood's overemphasis on dramatic kill scenes masks the fact that many deployments end without a single round discharged. When suppressors appear in films, they're often portrayed as rendering rifles whisper quiet and invisible. Reality is different. Suppressors reduce noise and muzzle flash, but a supersonic round is still loud enough to be heard across distance. The effect is about concealment and survivability, not invisibility. Similarly, scenes where snipers perform feats like flipping cars with a well-placed round belong purely in cinematic exaggeration. A single bullet cannot shift vehicle dynamics that way. Real effects are limited to punctures, engine damage, or disabling specific components. Snipers remain one of the most disciplined and technically skilled roles in modern forces, but their methods still operate under physics and doctrine, not spectacle. The myths make for engaging stories, yet the truth shows that precision comes from patience, teamwork, and science-backed tools rather than Hollywood mystique. That same tension between lone hero imagery and how real units fight appears again when attention turns to heavy armor, where screen portrayals of solitary tanks capture the same kind of distortion. Tank warfare with battlefield doctrine. Films often turn tanks into the centerpiece of a battle, showing a single armored vehicle smashing through opposition, as though sheer steel alone decides the outcome. In reality, modern doctrine never treats tanks as solitary weapons. On their own, they are vulnerable and exposed, especially in urban areas where alleys, windows, and rooftops offer enemies countless angles for attack. Tanks survive and succeed only as part of larger combined arms operations where infantry, engineers, artillery, and air assets all coordinate to cover one another. Contemporary doctrine embeds tanks within tightly choreographed maneuvers. Infantry advances alongside armor to guard against close-range threats like ambush teams with rockets. Artillery neutralizes or suppresses fortified positions ahead, clearing paths tanks cannot handle themselves. Combat engineers clear obstructions, mines, or improvise devices that would immobilize heavy vehicles. Overhead, drones and manned aircraft extend visibility, spotting concealed anti-tank positions. This blend of arms ensures armor avoids the fate of isolation, but it requires constant communication and planning, elements movies usually cut from the picture in favor of raw spectacle. Urban terrain is one of the most unforgiving environments for armor. Historical lessons from World War II street battles to more recent urban fighting consistently show tanks being destroyed when pushed into cities without infantry screening. Without dismounts to clear side streets and upper stories, crews face blind zones where handheld anti-tank weapons excel. Modern armies still study those examples, reinforcing why doctrine emphasizes synchronized infantry support rather than charging a tank column into a city square unsupported. There is no hero tank in real doctrine. Survivability comes through integration. Another crucial piece absent from films is logistics. A single tank burns through massive amounts of fuel, carries a limited number of main gun rounds, and demands constant upkeep. In cinema, tanks roll indefinitely, but in training and war, a unit's tempo is shaped by how quickly supply convoys can reach them. Tracks, suspension, and barrels wear out far faster than audiences might expect, and without technicians nearby, an armored advance literally grinds to a halt. Doctrine therefore plans around resupply cycles as much as combat itself. Technology adds protection but not invincibility. Modern active protection systems can detect and intercept incoming missiles with counterfire, but they have limited capacity and can be overwhelmed. A tank might stop one strike only to succumb to the next. Similarly, real gunnery unfolds at ranges of several kilometers, with fire control computers calculating distance and movement to make accurate kills. Films that show tanks circling one another at point-blank range for dramatic duels give the illusion of resilience, but those depictions misrepresent how crews are trained to fight. Anti-armor weapons continue to develop faster than defenses. Top attack munitions bypass armor by striking weak roof profiles. Portable guided missiles and loitering drones can stalk armored formations from above or behind. For this reason, modern doctrine never glorifies an isolated tank operating independently. Armor remains powerful, but only within the orchestration of combined arms that balances its strengths and mitigates its vulnerabilities. And while tanks embody heavy firepower, survivability for crews and units depends on far more than metal and munitions. The way lives are preserved when machines fail is equally critical, a reality often obscured in films where battlefield medicine is depicted as instant and miraculous. Combat medical procedures. Combat survival isn't only about firepower or armor. It depends just as much on how quickly the wounded receive care. Movies often portray medics as miracle workers who arrive at exactly the right second, perform complex surgery in the open dirt, and bring soldiers back to full strength in under a minute. In reality, combat medicine doesn't work that way. By 2025, battlefield care is focused on a specific sequence of life-saving priorities, controlling bleeding, opening airways, stabilizing the casualty, and moving them into the evacuation chain as fast as possible. Field surgery in the middle of a firefight isn't part of the role. The first priority remains bleeding control. Tourniquets, pressure dressings, and hemostatic agents are the core weapons against battlefield deaths. If a casualty's breathing is compromised, medics rely on airway maneuvers or simple adjuncts rather than dramatic incisions. These steps are quick and direct, aimed at buying time rather than finishing recovery on the spot. What truly shifts survival rates is speed of evacuation, getting casualties from point of injury to surgical providers further back, where trained trauma teams can operate in controlled environments. Survival in today's conflicts reflects advances in evacuation networks more than any new heroics performed under fire. Cinematic shortcuts ignore this entirely. Films show wounded troops lifted out instantly by helicopters or recovering in the same scene. Real medical evacuation times depend on terrain, weather, and enemy fire. That standard of reaching surgery within an hour, the golden hour, cannot always be met in contested battles. Evacuation may take several hours, and medics work tirelessly to keep the casualty stable long enough to bridge that gap, even when supplies and conditions are far from ideal. Those delays define life-saving efforts, something rarely acknowledged on screen. Technology is making a difference. Medics are now equipped with portable monitors, point-of-care ultrasound devices, and stored blood products for transfusions in the field. Virtual telesupport adds another lifeline. Secure communications allow frontline medics to stream vitals and video feeds to doctors advising remotely, even from thousands of miles away. That link doesn't make for dramatic cinema, but in practice it means relatively junior medics can access expert guidance in real time during emergencies. At the same time, the job remains punishing. Unlike the tireless figures in movies, medics carry heavy loads of equipment and face the emotional strain of working on friends and teammates. Fatigue and mental pressure build quickly in combat conditions. Units cycle responsibilities and provide reinforcement for exactly this reason. Human endurance is finite, and no amount of training erases the toll. Ultimately, combat medicine in 2025 is about sustaining life long enough to enable evacuation, not about performing miracles in the mud. Tourniquets and careful stabilization matter far more than cinematic surgery scenes. Soldiers survive because they are moved into organized casualty care chains, not because a medic can somehow replace a full operating room on the battlefield. And just as success in medicine depends on teams and networks moving in sync, so too does success at the operational level, where modern wars are fought across multiple branches coordinating as one. Joint operations representation. In movies, different branches of the military often look like they're acting in separate worlds. directors stage sequences where the Army storm buildings, the Air Force sweeps in overhead, and the Navy supports from offshore, with little sense that these forces are tied together by the same plan. That separation works visually for an audience, but it misrepresents the way combat is actually organized today. In practice, operations are built around joint integration from the outset, with shared networks, common operating pictures, and combined planning that connect every service participating in a mission. Modern joint operations depend on constant exchange across those networks. Ground movements, naval launches, and airstrikes all feed into the same operational picture, coordinated through joint command centers. Intelligence flows are shared across secure links, meaning that when an aircrew delivers a strike or a platoon advances, those actions have already been aligned during planning and refined in real time. Success rests less on one branch improvising and more on synchronized updates that keep multiple elements moving in the same direction. What films rarely show is the friction inside this process. Each branch still carries its own procedures, preferred tools, and cultural tendencies that don't always align smoothly. The Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force rely on liaison officers and formal joint doctrine to ensure terminology, timing, and priorities match in execution. These deliberate efforts prevent missteps when forces converge, but coordination takes work and is never automatic. The need for that alignment shapes both the tempo and the risk of real operations. Coalitions add another layer of challenge. A single mission might bring together Allied aircraft, local infantry, and naval forces using different platforms and communication systems. Commanders must balance varying rules of engagement, translate across technical standards, and safeguard communication security across multiple partners. The result is a truly multinational strike package that requires more coordination than Hollywood ever depicts, and it shows how central collaboration has become to warfare in 2025. The space domain is also part of this system. Satellites now provide imaging, navigation confidence, and secure communications that link these disparate forces together in real time. Without them, naval signals, Army maneuvers, and Air Force strikes would be working under degraded awareness. Space assets are not supporting tools at the edge of operations. They have become integral to modern joint warfare. Films also skim past the role of logistics and command chains. Sustaining fuel, ammunition, and supplies while moving armor, aircraft, and troops across multiple domains is as decisive as the combat itself. Movies often highlight lone wolves or full branches acting as if they operate in isolation, but what carries modern campaigns forward is the coordination of supply lines, synchronization of tempo, and management of risk across services. When it comes to portraying joint warfare, cinema favors the illusion of independence and heroics. The authentic picture is one of layered networks, deliberate planning, and careful alignment across varied organizations. And just as these complexities are stripped away to simplify combat on screen, the people giving the orders are often reduced to caricature, raising another gap between Hollywood's preferred drama and the realities of modern leadership. Military leadership on screen. Films often present military leadership as a matter of volume, commanders screaming across the battlefield, barking insults, and holding authority through intimidation. By 2025, leadership in real forces looks very different. Modern doctrine measures effective command not by how loudly an officer projects, but by how well they practice mission command, building shared understanding, fostering mutual trust, delegating responsibility, and ensuring units can adapt when conditions shift. Competence and stewardship matter far more than theatrics. This shift didn't happen overnight. Decades of institutional reform move away from the command by fear model to one that emphasizes education, experience, and initiative. Tactical decision games, scenario-based training, and professional education courses all reinforce this philosophy. The evolution toward mission command reflects a recognition that battlefields are too complex for micromanagement or one individual directing every move. Leaders provide intent, supply the framework, and trust subordinates to execute with discipline. That balance between guidance and autonomy is at the core of modern command culture. Servant leadership remains a guiding principle. Commanders are expected to protect their people, set clear expectations, and embody standards instead of enforcing them through cycles of verbal abuse. Correction is real, but it's linked to mentoring and accountability rather than humiliation. The goal is to cultivate competence and resilience, not hesitation or avoidance. Soldiers respond to leaders who demonstrate consistent judgment and who share the burdens of service, because credibility comes from example more than from tone. This model becomes clearest in crisis. Hollywood often reduces leadership under fire to dramatic gestures or a single order shouted above the noise. In practice, leaders face dilemmas where there are no perfect answers. Commanders weigh the urgency of mission success against the risks to their own units and to civilians nearby. Approving or withholding a strike, redirecting evacuation assets, or pulling forces back under threat all carry heavy moral weight. Quiet decisiveness in these moments defines leadership more than speeches on a battlefield podium ever could. Films also miss the administrative and logistical responsibilities that consume much of a commander's effort. Coordinating supplies, maintaining morale, and managing personnel issues all shape whether a unit can function under stress. None of this makes for cinematic energy, but in reality, it is what ensures operations do not collapse. A commander's success is measured in readiness and resilience, not in the ability to memorize a stirring line for the camera. By 2025, leadership training also stresses inclusivity and the prevention of toxic command climates. Building trust across diverse teams, managing ethical standards, and reinforcing professionalism are now seen as essential. Responsibilities. Screaming may linger in Hollywood portrayals, but professionalism, patience, and accountability shape real command. The modern officer succeeds not by domination, but by creating conditions where subordinates can do their jobs effectively. These standards of credibility and discipline explain why units operate the way they do in the field. And just as leadership is structured around trust and accountability, those same concepts extend down to how individual soldiers are expected to handle their weapons. Weapons handling and safety protocols. Action films often portray chaotic gun handling, but the standards in real units are strict. On screen, rifles swing across teammates, fingers rest on triggers constantly, and weapons are brandished like stage props. In reality, even a moment of that would halt an exercise or mission immediately. The cornerstone rules drilled into every recruit are easy to remember, yet absolute. Always treat the weapon as if it's loaded, never point it at anything you aren't prepared to destroy, and keep your finger off the trigger until ready to fire. These aren't abstract guidelines, they prevent accidents that could injure teammates or even compromise entire operations. Weapon safety is enforced through routine checks. Before any live training or combat task, chambers are cleared under supervision and each soldier confirms their weapons state. These steps repeat constantly, not for show but to eliminate assumptions. The point is simple: complacency kills. Where a film presents casual, relaxed movement with rifles across a room, an actual unit would see dangerous lapses and a breakdown of trust. Respect for these routines sustains safety, and every member of a team is responsible for upholding them. This discipline becomes critical once stress enters the equation. In combat, muscle memory dictates performance. Soldiers repeat loading, clearing, and immediate action drills thousands of times during training. By the time they reach combat zones, those motions happen automatically, even while tired, injured, or under fire. That repetition prevents negligent discharges when adrenaline spikes, keeping positions concealed and teammates unhurt. Movies cut to stylized reloads and flashy handling for spectacle, but the real professional standard is built on consistency and control, not flair. When breaches happen in real units, the consequences are severe. A negligent discharge is not brushed off as harmless. It's investigated, documented, and often career-ending. Beyond personal accountability, a single misfire can reveal a team's position, injure fellow soldiers, or cause commanders to suspend training outright. These stakes underline why weapons aren't carried casually. Safety is linked directly to mission success and team survival, not just individual responsibility. In comparison, the way actors move with rifles draws the sharpest contrast. Fingers clamped to triggers or muzzles wandering without awareness instantly signal inexperience to anyone trained. For professionals, such slips erode credibility, even in fictional portrayals. Correct handling is not optional stagecraft in a unit. It is intrinsic to proving competence and earning trust. The system of checks, discipline, and accountability that surrounds weapons handling shows how far reality diverges from screen shortcuts. Soldiers are trained until safe behavior is automatic, because the smallest mistake can alter outcomes. Hollywood's choice to ignore those rules erases the responsibility built into every military drill. And just as those safety protocols keep operations viable, there are equally strict demands placed on the machines soldiers rely on for movement and support. Military vehicle operations. Films often present military vehicles as flawless machines that never falter. Convoys roar across deserts, crush obstacles, and crash through walls without ever stopping. Engines never overheat, tracks never throw, and fuel tanks seem limitless. For a viewer, it creates the picture of unstoppable momentum, but operational reality is far more fragile. Vehicles demand constant attention, and they rarely deliver that kind of perfection for long. In real formations, logistics and maintenance are as important as the vehicles themselves. Tanks, armor carriers, and even light trucks consume huge amounts of fuel in short distances. An armored battalion can burn thousands of gallons in a single day. To sustain them, refueling points are staged in advance, convoys of tanker trucks travel with escort protection, and schedules are enforced tightly. More than just drivers, crews are responsible for monitoring gauges, recording mileage, and carrying out stop checks. A stranded vehicle doesn't just slow itself, it can halt the tempo of an entire formation behind it. Preventive maintenance cycles are at the center of keeping fleets functional in 2025. Crews check suspension, braking systems, electrical connections, and fluid levels. Every time they halt for more than a few minutes. These routines aren't glamorous, but they prevent catastrophic losses that could disable a formation mid-march. Inaccurate fuel readings, neglected cooling systems, or cracked tires can quickly end an operation. For the soldier in the driver's seat, operating a military vehicle means integrating mechanical checks into tactical awareness, something screen portrayals almost never show. Trials with hybrid electric platforms add another layer. Prototypes promise extended range and quieter signatures, but they introduce new maintenance burdens. Batteries, advanced cooling loops, and electronic distribution systems all need specialized oversight. Predictive maintenance tools, sensors that flag parts wearing out before failure, are increasingly fielded to anticipate breakdowns before they happen. This reflects how technology is reshaping sustainment, though it remains far from the effortless endurance shown in films. Support elements fill the gaps Hollywood ignores. Every mobile battalion is shadowed by recovery and maintenance crews who dedicate all their time to keeping vehicles moving. Their trucks carry spare transmissions, tires, welders, and tow cables. In rugged or hostile environments, a single disabled vehicle might require hours to extract under fire. Without these specialized teams, frontline units could not keep pace or even maneuver into combat. Convoy operations also carry tactical risks missing from cinematic car chases. In real conflicts, roadside ambushes, drones, and improvised explosives all threaten supply lines. Protecting fuel and logistics convoys is as important as shielding the armored spearheads they support. Forces schedule resupply carefully, coordinate security, and integrate overwatch to keep vehicles moving safely. What looks like seamless pursuit in film actually depends on layered planning to prevent collapse under attack. The contrast becomes clearest in chase sequences. Movies show military trucks barrel rolling, slamming into obstacles, and driving away unscathed. Real vehicles aren't built for endless punishment. Sharp turns risk rollover, suspension systems shear under stress, and tires blow out under excess strain. Movement through cities or mountain roads requires cautious maneuvering, not stunt driving. Rather than flawless power, real military vehicles reflect how logistics, crews, and mechanics make endurance possible. The machines are assets, but fragile ones that demand resources and planning to survive combat. Yet while films prefer to ignore these mechanical realities, they do sometimes turn attention to another truth of war, the aftermath carried home by the people inside those vehicles. Combat stress and PTSD accuracy. Movies now often depict soldiers carrying invisible wounds from combat, but are those portrayals of post-traumatic stress really accurate? For a long time, cinema either ignored trauma entirely or reduced it to shorthand, one dramatic breakdown scene, sometimes violent, sometimes chaotic, standing in for a condition that in reality is far more complex. In recent years, some depictions have grown more thoughtful. Withdrawn characters, restless nights, or struggles to reconnect with home life have started to appear, and these moments come closer to what many service members report facing. The shift is important because it steers audiences away from caricatures and toward an understanding that trauma manifests in quieter, more enduring ways. By 2025, militaries have committed significant resources to addressing combat stress proactively. Early screening, routine counseling, and destigmatized access to care are now integral parts of service life. Soldiers often encounter behavioral health specialists before redeployment, and follow-up support continues once they return home. This cultural shift is real, though films only sometimes reflect it on screen. When productions show counseling sessions or normalization of therapy in daily military routines, they echo practices that actually exist. Those depictions add authenticity and remind audiences that healing is built into structure, not left to chance. The most accurate portrayals are often the most understated. A character staring at an empty room in silence, someone drifting from family conversations, or the depiction of endless fatigue and restlessness, these align closely with lived experience. Other times, however, screen versions glance back toward outdated tropes, painting PTSD as sudden irrational violence or extreme instability. Such shortcuts oversimplify. Real trauma is often hidden beneath controlled exteriors, shaped as much by fatigue, avoidance, and hypervigilance as by anything instantly visible. What lacks drama for television is precisely what characterizes many cases. Training pipelines now integrate stress resilience education early. Recruits and junior leaders are taught how to recognize warning signs in peers, what resources exist, and how to react before problems escalate. This reflects years of institution-wide change to reduce stigma and promote early intervention. Films frequently miss this progress, continuing to isolate characters in silence or depict commanders as dismissive. The truth is gradual, sometimes imperfect, but steadily shifting toward open acknowledgement rather than secrecy. Moral injury is a dimension that filmmakers occasionally capture with depth. Characters wrestling with actions that clash with personal values, or with guilt tied to decisions made in war, appear closer to how many veterans describe long-term psychological weight. These portrayals move beyond cliches and treat trauma as a complex moral and emotional burden that cannot be simplified to a single symptom. They resonate because they reflect the reality that not all scars are shaped only by immediate survival events. What films almost never show are the evolving therapies available. By 2025, evidence-based approaches such as talk therapy, structured exposure techniques, medication, and telehealth connections play active roles in treatment. Remote systems now allow deployed units or returning veterans to connect with specialists from anywhere, reducing barriers and speeding support. Recovery, however, is never instant. Progress is gradual, often measured in weeks and months, and anchored by a support network rather than one miraculous breakthrough. Representation has improved, but cinema still tends to simplify what remains a long, uneven process. The progress lies in portraying trauma as ongoing and deeply human, even when many of the mechanisms of real care remain hidden. And just as this invisible weight follows service members after combat, another part of life rarely depicted on screen is what physically sustains forces in the field, where supplies, fuel, and infrastructure dictate the pace of an entire campaign. Modern military logistics and supply chains. Hollywood action often skips over what really determines whether an army can keep moving: modern military logistics and supply chains. On screen, fighters spray endless ammunition, launch grenades at will, and vehicles never seem to run out of gas. In reality, every operation is limited by sustainment. Commanders plan around fuel, ammunition, medical evacuation chains, and communications networks because those factors dictate operational tempo and strategy. No unit fights indefinitely. Real combat turns on these limits. Fuel availability sets how far armored formations can push, ammunition resupply sets the pace of attacks, and reliable medevac networks influence where troops can safely deploy. Even digital infrastructure plays into this. Without secure bandwidth for command systems, entire formations may struggle to coordinate. In practice, commanders measure combat power, not just in troops or hardware, but in how many days their units can operate before resupply becomes critical. Films focus narrowly on firefights, but it is logistics that keeps those battles possible in the first place. Technology is beginning to reshape how this sustainment is managed. Predictive logistics now uses artificial intelligence to anticipate demand and schedule replenishment before shortages become dangerous. These models track usage rates, terrain, and conditions to forecast when parts might fail or what quantities of munitions need to move forward. At the tactical level, militaries are experimenting with drone resupply systems. Lightweight quadcopters are being tested to deliver blood, ammunition, or batteries across hostile terrain, reducing the exposure risk of manned convoys. These systems remain in early stages, but they show how automation and forecasting are becoming essential elements of planning. Supply convoys themselves remain highly vulnerable. Instead of being invisible in the background, in practice they are prime targets. Trucks carrying fuel or ammunition make obvious objectives for ambush, roadside bombs, or drone attacks. A single destroyed convoy has the power to stall an entire advance, forcing units to pause until replacements arrive. This fragile backbone is something audiences rarely see, but for soldiers and planners is a daily reality. Just as invisible to film audiences are the people who sustain operations. Mechanics, fuel handlers, drivers, and supply specialists make up entire formations whose sole function is to keep combat units alive and moving. Their work lacks cinematic glamour, but underpins everything else. Without them, frontline units cannot fire, maneuver, or survive. By 2025, Doctrine has absorbed these truths. No plan is drawn up without detailed sustainment tables, redundancy measures, and contingency routes. When resupply falters, even the most advanced technology or capable soldiers are forced to halt. That is why logistics remains the quiet but decisive factor in modern military power. And while audiences are drawn to the spectacle of endless ammunition or unstoppable vehicles, those myths distract from how wars are actually won or lost. The real story is that logistics, not limitless endurance, determines outcomes. Which brings us back to the central theme, the gap between cinematic heroics and the complex, integrated reality of how militaries operate today. In the end, films do capture some of the right themes. Drones, cyber operations, and AI are shaping battlefields, but they exaggerate speed, autonomy, and individual heroics. Real warfare in 2025 is integrated across domains, constantly contested by electronic warfare and cyber threats, and constrained by logistics, oversight, and doctrine. Success comes from coordination, not a single weapon system or lone fighter. Which scene surprised you most with how different it looks compared to reality? Let me know in the comments. And if you value expert-led, evidence-based breakdowns that separate cinematic drama from operational truth, this channel delivers them every time.